All right. Well, it's 8:30. We'll go ahead and get started. Before I pass it over to Michael, just a few quick housekeeping procedures for everyone. Today is very much a conversation. So if you have questions, we do expect you to ask them. However, when you're not speaking, please remain on mute so there isn't any background noise and Michael isn't interrupted when he's presenting. Your video is optional, but we do encourage you so we can look at you when we're speaking to you. There's one button on the screen that I'd like you all to avoid hitting. It says present now. Do not click that as that will interrupt Michael's presentation. If and when you do have questions, feel free to use the raise hand feature, put it into the chat, or just join with your microphone and ask Michael. That'll be fine. If you have any technical issues, please put those into the chat and I will do my best to help you through those. Just be aware that most of the time the technical issues stem from your own Wi-Fi connection. And finally, we are recording this session today, so you will be able to refer back to it on our YouTube channel later this week. Before I pass it over to Mike, I'd like to just give a brief introduction. He has a vast and varied background in golf instruction, club fitting, nutrition, fitness, and biochemistry, and provides an all-encompassing skill set to athletes looking to improve performance. Over the past 15 years, multi-platform technology has become the standard in golf instruction, and the ability to present sophisticated data in plain words is more crucial than ever. And this is exactly Michael's specialization. He's been working with tour players for quite a while now and is currently working with the likes of Alex Spita and Darren Clark. With that, Michael, take it away.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate the support and the help of all the Philly section and their members for having me present here. Steve Saraki, big thanks to you as well for kind of the impetus behind all this. A little quick background on me. I'm from Boston. I went to Methodist University back when it was called Methodist College, graduated in the PGM program, and then started working immediately in the Norwalk, Connecticut area. 3 months after college, I was giving 2,800 half-hour lessons a year, and it was pretty overwhelming. Did that for a while, left the industry, got into the fitness industry, had a background in that, and then came back into golf in about 2009, 2010. And went back to a club, then opened up my own facility, and really got spurred on by the likes of Steve Saraki and Andy Plummer and Mike Bennett to become a Stack and Tilt authorized instructor, where I was able to learn more about the three-dimensional aspects of the swing, and opened up my own gears facility, which has three-dimensional motion capture, which is what we're going to show today and utilize. My basic goal is to do a couple of quick case studies and then ask and open the floor for questions. So then after 2018, I moved down to Florida and I started coaching full-time on the tour last year. So spent a few years with COVID and whatnot, kind of was teaching golf, playing a little bit, and then decided to, was fortunate enough to be asked to be out on tour, semi-permanent and pretty full-time now. So with that said, let me share my screen and start the discussion. One of the things that I like to emphasize is your ability to draw a concept. And in golf, we have a model for the golf swing that would be represented by this simple stick figure. I would state that the left shoulder, and this is really pointed out in many textbooks, the Search for the Perfect Swing had a model swing, or a double pendulum model, that we would say would be created by the left arm to the ground. That would be the first pendulum would be the arm, the second pendulum would be the club, and that club would be tracing an arc. That arc would be portrayed on the ground like that, and another arc for the hand path. So you'd have a path for the club head, a path for the hand path as well. And for this double pendulum model, we would put in a golf ball here, 3 golf balls back, and that would create the angle of attack to the ground. So now this blue line would create, this blue vector would be the path. So let's say this piece of pie here in shaded blue area would be 3 degrees down because of 3 golf balls back as a general reference. That would be 3 degrees out to the right, roughly. Now, we need a club face to hit a shot, so we would just model in an orange line here for the club face, and if that club face is slightly close to the three-dimensional path or the blue line there, we'd have a push draw that would come back to the target. Put a flag out here, so the ball would start to the right and curve back. To achieve this model, we would have to have the lead shoulder go down and the trail shoulder go up in order to turn the center of the swing, the circle there in orange, around another center would be the base of the neck. This way the head wouldn't move side to side. In order to accomplish that, the lead knee would flex, the trail knee would extend in order to turn the pelvis in a centered motion. So in the backswing, you would have the spine, I'll draw that in green, I'll draw that in blue there. The spine would stay centered or stacked. So the term stacked in the stack and tilt is the vertebral column from the face-on view here. That's a pretty common understanding of the three-dimensional modeling of the swing. I know we've asked Mike Duffy if there's any other way to model the swing, and he would say no, and he's fine with that from a biomechanical standpoint. I know Pete Cunningham's in this. He was at Penn State with Mike Duffy and Andy Plummer when he asked that question. So any questions or comments on that model of the swing that I would use? I know Steve uses, I know a lot of instructors use, but generally speaking, I think most of us are pretty okay with that type of a centered pivot in the backswing. If there's any questions about that, please leave a comment, but that would be the general modeling of the swing. That said, let me pull up a demonstration of how this works in 3D on gears. So this is one of my guys, Gene Sowers, who won the US Senior Open a couple years back. And I've got a couple of things I'd like to point out here. First thing I'd like to point out is that his shoulder tilt here is 8.49 degrees to the trail side. The trail side is lower than the lead side. By the time he moves to the top of the backswing, we've orbited 90 degrees around. That shoulder tilt is 30 degrees in the opposite direction. So another way to look at this in 3D as we turn the model slowly around, we can pan and zoom and see this shoulder tilt number. Let me take away some of the other numbers. The shoulder tilt number is starting to go from a positive 8 degrees upward. And as we start moving it, it starts to tilt in the opposite direction of the turn. So by the time he's orbited to say P2 or P1.5, he's at 0 degrees, right about there. So the shoulders are now level about P1.5 and the shaft's at about 45 degrees. As we continue to model the swing or turn around the arc rather, the left shoulder continues to go down, the right shoulder continues to go up. I know back in, got to be the late 2000s when this was first introduced, I know Marty Nowicki came down to the section there and there was almost a fist fight there. It's on YouTube. It's pretty awesome to watch actually. That this didn't happen in the swing. So here's the three-dimensional description of the swing where the trail shoulder has gone down, the lead shoulder has gone down, the trail shoulder has gone up. By the time Gene's at the top of the backswing, he's turned 101 degrees around the arc and his head is still in the bubble. These other numbers that I have on the screen here, the 43 degrees, that is how many degrees forward Gene is bent forward at the start. So if we remember that number, round it to 44. So 44 degrees of forward bend. By the time he's at the top of the backswing, that 44 degrees is now 3.6 degrees. Call that 4 degrees. So he's extended out of his forward bend 48 degrees. Now, when we look at the other number we have here, which is 5.89, call that 6 degrees. By the time the side bend to the right side of the golfer, to the trail side, is 6 degrees. By the time he's taken that to the top of the backswing, he's actually tilted to his left 36 degrees. So he went from 36 plus another 6 degrees. That's 42 degrees. So we had 48 degrees of change in the extension, and he had 42 degrees of change in the side flexion, lateral flexion. So it's about a one-to-one relationship there. The amount that a player extends out of his forward bend is the same amount he's going to replace it with the side tilt. And that way, Gene's head doesn't pop out of the bubble. I will say that was part of this lesson, to have his head ensure that it was staying centered in the pivot. Because as you can see here, from about P2, this head starts to rise a little bit as it comes up. So the lesson with Gene was to keep that left shoulder driving down. That felt weird. And then I asked him to keep the left hip flexed a little bit more. That felt weird. I told him he has permission to flex his left knee more as he goes back. And that was the key for him. So being able to use the sum of all the joint participation, each joint has to be accounted for. So to get this left shoulder down, you could do it from the shoulder going a little bit more down. You could do it from the thoracic part of the spine. You can do it from the lumbar. You can do it from the hip. You can do it from the knee. You can do it from the ankle. But the sum of each one of those joints is participating in making sure that this player keeps a stable inclination to the ground. And there's the stable inclination. He started at 54 degrees. By the time he's at the top of the backswing, he's 57. So there's the delta, the 3 degrees, 4 degrees between his setup and the top of the backswing, where he didn't side bend equally as much as he extended. So there's the 3 to 4 degree difference, which is still a stable inclination, not a still inclination. So I don't really like using the word still for the inclination to the ground, or what people would call the spine tilt or the spine angle. I would never use that word spine angle, because you can see the spine actually changes its angles throughout the swing in order to keep the head stable. You can see it really well from this 3/4 view here, where he's in a right tilt to start with. There's the shoulder. I'll put the hip and the knee lines as well. The hips are a little bit more level here. Oh, they're actually 2 degrees up. But the knee tilt line is 6 degrees. And as he goes into his backswing, all those numbers are now negative. They're tilted to the left, tilted down to the ball. So the beauty of 3D is the ability to see this golfer in a before and after in just one swing, and look at how the numbers are making sense and what the model is. So not saying you need 3D to be able to, not saying you need gears to be able to give a golf lesson. However, being able to point out the three-dimensional aspects of this template or this model here can be transferred over to an iPad or a cell phone. If you just draw a dot on the head, draw a couple of dots on the shoulders, by the time it takes the top of the back, and where's this left shoulder orbited down to, the right shoulder orbited up. So to get a little bit more into detail, the lateral flexion induces the contralateral rotation of the golf swing. And that's not a Mike Monavian thing. That's not a stack and tilt thing. That's just a human anatomy thing. I will pull up another. There, 1 second, as I pull up another screen to look at. Not sure I know how to jump from screen to screen, but I'll just keep popping up another one. This should pop up. Here we go. So this is the it's a college textbook, physiology of the joints, and in the book, this is my favorite paragraph in the book. The automatic rotation of the vertebrae depends on 2 mechanisms. Let me just zoom that in so we can all see it a little bit clearer. And I lost my zoom buttons. There we go. The automatic rotation of the vertebrae depends on 2 mechanisms. Lateral flexion increases the internal pressure of the disc. By tilting to one side, you can see in the bottom right here, by tilting to one side, you're increasing the pressure on that side of the disc. So the jelly-like substance goes to the opposite side. So the internal pressure of this disc on the side of the movement, as the disc is wedge-shaped, its compressed substance tends to escape towards a zone of lower pressure, i.e. contralaterally. This is what leads to rotation. So Dr. Kapanji stating in that book, lateral flexion induces contralateral rotation. So we have a lot of golfers who are seasoned citizens, and they say they can't turn, and most of those people end up turning in the direction they're tilted. So by the time they take it to the top of the backswing, the right shoulder hasn't gone up enough, the left shoulder hasn't gone down enough, and their head, as a result, is raised out of the bubble. And then all of a sudden, the only thing left to do from there is kind of turn around and try to get to the front side of the arc. So that would be the first part of the thing I want to cover. Any questions so far on the modeling there? Okay, take that as a no. Any questions in the chat here that I don't see or see?
None yet, no, sir.
Okay, thank you. That said, let's talk about a little bit more of the final.
I just want to jump in real quick.
Go ahead,
First
Pete.
of all, thanks for the great illustrations. Second of all, how much rotation does a degree of flexion induce, roughly speaking? I know it goes segment joint by joint, but how much rotation does that lateral flexion create?
You know, if you'll allow me to research that, and I know there's an answer to that in the book. I've seen all the charts on that. Each joint has about, each one of the vertebral column joints have somewhere between 3 to 5 degrees, I think, in the lumbar and thoracic on average, and it's the sum of all those joints. It depends on the degree that you're bent over, but for general, broad, non-scientific, double-blind internet research studies, because I know Pete Cunningham and we have a good relationship, I'm going to say that on a 45-degree angle, it's 1-to-1.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. So it's substantial. It's not a minimal amount. It's a substantial amount. I don't need it.
With a driver, by tilting left 1 degree, you're going to get about 1 degree of turn and 1 degree of extension. You can kind of go all that. I think you're going to get more degrees of turn, but that turn number is it's a little bit skewed because you got the need for extending and changing flex. So there is a number for you. It's based on how much you're tilted over.
Yeah.
There's a big math equation on that. It's in the book.
Yeah. Like, so I'm not interested in nailing it down to a number. We just wonder whether it was a minimal amount of, induced rotation or whether it was a substantial amount. And he seems to be saying that the book says it's a substantial amount.
So here's how I would answer that to all your Thursday morning golfers. If you put your arms up to the side, and everybody can try this sitting down in their chair. If you tilt to one side, say you tilt to your trail side, and you turn, you're going to feel the compression. You're not going to be able to turn very much. However, if you tilt to the opposite side and turn in your backswing, you'll feel how much more open the facet joints are in the rotation, the contralateral rotation. So people who think they can't turn,
so you're
usually not tilting in the opposite direction. That makes sense, Pete?
Right. Yeah. So you're saying that that lateral flexion allows you to turn more, not that so much that it creates turn. Is that true?
The word is induce. Lateral flexion induces contralateral rotation. If I had I wasn't on the road in my office, I'd have my junior golfer spine that I could hold by the neck and tilt the cervical spine, and it will automatically turn the pelvis.
Yeah.
So
okay,
it is.
Thanks, man.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
You got it. All right. So I'm going to just pull up another golfer here. So we've gotten the golfer to the top of the backswing. And I'm just going to pull up Anthony here. Get my notes. So this is, I wanted to make a case study here with more normal club golfers to help share the story of help you guys as instructors and give you a takeaway that you can use tomorrow on your lesson tee if you needed to. So this is Anthony Monahan. He came in from Calgary with his brother. This is the last lesson I gave before I started driving up. And he's got a very nice swing. He's in his mid-60s. He's your typical club golfer, dedicated, plays 300 rounds of golf a year probably. A lot of indoor golf. Head is moving, putting him on 3D gears. You can see very quickly that the head moves out of the bubble at the top of the backswing. Base is quite shut. If we turn this 90 degrees, You can start seeing that he's got quite an in to out swing direction. You can, if I put the target line down here, you can see that the club path is going excessively out quite a bit. And his low point control, you could assume, being so much from the inside, would have low point issues on the trail side. He'd be hitting it fat, he'd be hitting pushes and big hooks would be the pattern there. So one of the things we talked about, and this was a step-by-step process of how a lesson would go with me. We have the before there, and then we had him hit, 5-6 shots, and then we had a conversation. And then on the 8th shot in blue, we asked him to extend more, because you notice the head was moving back out of the bubble in gold. So the blue one's the new one. And you can see the head, it's still up out of the bubble, but it's on the lead side of the bubble. So what changed? This 10-degree number, there's a lot of numbers we can show, but we're going to highlight. I'm going to take all these off and just show one number. So this is the rib cage forward bend number, how much Anthony is bent forward. It's about the same, 42, 45 degrees. So 42 on the right. But in gold, by the time he took it to the top of the backswing, he had extended out of that 44 degrees to 0. We asked him to get a little bit more extension, and now he's 10 degrees extended. So when you overlay these two, you can see how much more forward the head is and how much more the ball will be in the central vision. His spine is much more vertical here, and you can see in the body lines, if we show the spine number, 93, he went from 3 degrees, 3 degrees of extension to now 3 degrees of flexion to 4 degrees of extension, for a delta of 7 degrees of more extension. As a result, the butt end of the club traveled further, creating more potential energy. You can see the club heads further on the front side of the arc as well. As a result, the downswing arc is narrower automatically. Excuse me, the downswing arc is not narrower. I'm looking at something else. Jumping ahead there, sorry. So how did he get the club to go longer? It was the 11 degrees, the added 10 degrees of extension of this thoracic spine. As a result, to Pete's question, he's now turned 5 more degrees because of the extension, as these joints are all coupled motions. Now, the next point was to get the head to come down. So on swing 12, we asked him to side bend a little bit more to keep the head down. So now we have a centered pivot. The ball's in the central vision. His head isn't up. It's not up and back relative to the ball. He's more over the ball, and he's going to be able to make low point control better. The guy in gold is going to tend to bottom out to the right with a rightward swing path. The guy in blue now is going to tend to bottom out more forward. The handle's more forward. The head is more forward at impact. And these were just, this is swing 12 with about 5 to 6 warm-ups. So it doesn't take very long once you have a model to go by. So the very first paint program there, the stick figure, ensuring that where to start. Well, looking at where the top of their backswing is the head shifted to the trail side? Is the head shifted to the lead side? Is it too high or too low? So the takeaway would be, if the head is rising, the player needs more side tilt. If the head is going forward in front of the bubble, the player needs more turn. If the head is going down, he needs more extension. So these are the 3-dimensional aspects that you can teach somebody tomorrow to be able to fix that very, very quickly. Getting ahead to another piece, now that we've got the player to the top of the backswing, what's the sequencing of bringing the club down? I would say that, and I think this would be a very common statement, if I can just go in the video here, that golfers have to raise the club. The club head has to ascend, or the butt end of the club has to ascend from P1 to start to P4 at the top of the backswing. There has to be some ascension in the backswing. Not a controversial statement. I make a few, but that one's not too bad. From P6 to P10, there's also an ascension of the butt end of the club. I would state that all the ascent is coming from mainly the spine and the way the spine works in the body, not from the limbs. However, our Tuesday and Thursday morning lessons, the elbows flex to get the club to rise, and the elbows flex to get the club to rise. So the limbs are being the responsibility for our club golfers, where we should give that responsibility to the body to extend out of its forward bend and replace it with side bend in order to ascend the club. Same thing on the downstroke, coming from P6 all the way, shaft parallel to the finish. The tucking of the hips and the back bending would be responsible for ascending the club. That leaves this gap from P4 to P6, the top of the backswing to the shaft parallel. I would argue that comes from the limbs coming down. And most good players utilize the limbs to come down. Bad players would use the spine to come down. When they start over tilting back, the head would move back out of our model, out of our bubble. You'd end up hitting the ground too far back, and you have to do something different to get to the golf ball. You have to reconcile the 3D path somehow, and that would be the engineering crux of the problem that we have to solve. So this golfer, Anthony, we took a pretty in-depth look at, and I'm not a big graph guy, but if you were to look at, I don't know how well graphs go along on Zoom meetings, but we're going to find out. So if we graph his lead shoulder abduction adduction number, so let me pull up the number there and remove all the other numbers to clean this up. So this number is the amount of the abduction or adduction. So he started, 90 would be kind of a neutral starting point. He started 10 degrees of adduction, adding the arm to the midline versus abducting or child abduction. When a child gets abducted, they get pulled away. So moving the arms away from the midline would be abduction, abduction. Adduction, you'd be adding to the midline, moving the arms across the chest. So this golfer's already started about 10 degrees across the chest. As he moves from P1 to P2, shaft parallel to the ground, that lead arm starts adding 3 degrees. From P3 to P4, he starts to add, from P2 to P3, starts adding another, we're at 71 degrees. So he's gone 9 degrees across his chest. By the time he's got to the top of the backswing, that arm has gone 51 degrees now. So he started at 80 degrees and he's adducted about 30 or 29 degrees across the chest. So the question is, if this golfer is lowering the body with the spine because the head was moving back, when does his arm start to begin to abduct? When does the arm start coming off the chest? And if we zoom in on the graph here, I'm going to ask, is that graph visible? Somebody can just give me a quick yes or no.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. So as this graph, the start of the swing is on the left. As he moves in time and space, the graph starts going down to a point where the vertical line is, that's the top of the backswing. At this point, this lead shoulder adduction does not rise up. It actually continues to get lower on the graph there. It's very subtle, but the lowest point of the graph is about 51, 45, 51. Where through right about here is the lowest part of the graph. So this golfer has continued to go from 51, I'll do this in super slow motion, 51, 51 at the top of the backswing. And he starts continuing to load that to 51. He's not unloading it yet. So that number needs to get larger and larger. Now it starts to begin to unload. So from the top of the backswing, he's delayed this arm coming off the chest. So he's pinned the arm. The golf machine called this the fourth accumulator, jamming the fourth accumulator to the chest. So the descent that we were looking for from the limbs hasn't arrived from the limbs. Or from the shoulders. It's arriving from the side tilting. So you can see the head starts to tilt back and up to make some space here. So what we did is we showed him the mechanics of this lead arm, and when we put the overlay, get these two overlaid, as he starts to come down, if we look at the graph now, just by asking him to move that left arm off the chest, the blue line bottoms out at the bottom of this line and starts to ascend. So this very subtle change here between the blue line coming upward and the yellow line continuing down allows the player more time to release this left arm off the chest, or abduct this left arm off the chest smoother in time and space. You'll notice the yellow one, he does abduct it faster later in the space, in the same amount of space. And then he starts overshooting it, and you'll have low point control problems because he's trying to get to the front side of the arc with that left arm. So to recap, the left arm abduction, adduction, the left arm goes across the chest and the back, and he has to start coming off the chest immediately. A player like Rory would pin it just for a few inches coming down, and then he would struggle to get it off the chest later, faster. Some believe this is more powerful. I would agree. It could provide more power in certain instances with a driver. However, now you have to unload it still to the point where you started or more in the same amount of space, in less space, actually, in less time. So there's some acceleration there. That can cause chaos. The Champions Tour players that I see have a lot more of a smoother pattern. These guys are building golf swings to play, to become a veteran. I mean, think about that. They're not trying to hit it the farthest. They're trying to keep it in play to play the long game of just picking off birdies here and there. And strokes gained is wonderful, but it's also horrible if you're hitting it out of bounds or in the rough. So hitting it straight, hitting it far enough to play the golf course with short clubs is pretty much the key. Looking back here at Anthony's swing as he comes down to P6, you'll notice now there's quite a shorter arc downstroke. If we remove the body here, the butt end of the club is a good inch in front of where it was. The club head is about 2 inches further forward. The left arm has abducted more degrees off coming into impact, smoother coming down. The butt end of the club is now not on the middle to outside of the thigh, but a little bit shorter on the downstroke arc. The low point's going to be more forward. If we pull up the low point number here, the low point went from Low point went from 167 millimeters to 115 millimeters. So he increased the low point by, that's 5 centimeters. Pretty large amount. 5 centimeters is about 1.5 inches, 2 inches, I think, for us Americans. It's a lot. So the low point is going to be more forward as a result, and this arm is going to abduct off the chest a lot easier and more around the arc. You can see the difference in the down the line. If the arm is pinned coming down, it's going to be out on the follow through. So we talked about how Anthony had the path going way out to the right. As he comes through, the hand path is in blue is a lot closer to the body, more inward on the body. The exit of the club now starts going under the shoulder blade versus above the shoulder blade. So he's now swinging more around him. And if you look at the hand path line I have, the gray hand path is the follow through hand path. So if you just look on 3D, the gray hand path, you can see it without even looking at the swing. If you just start at the beginning, you can see how the hand path here on the right, all three, the backswing, downswing, and follow through are pretty close to each other. On the left, the backswing, downswing, and the follow through are in different planes. So there's a lot more rising of the handle at impact in gold than there is in blue, and the hands are going across the body a lot more. So that would be Anthony's golf swing. Any kind of the second case study I had there. So just want to pause here for a moment, get some feedback, how everybody's doing here. If there's any questions. S. Riley.
Hey guys, question for you. Would you say that more, if somebody's early extending, they have more adduction, where if somebody's maintaining posture, that left arm can come off the body for
100%. That'd be a very safe statement to make that. That player is not using the arm to lower the club. As a result, the arm gets pinned. Now you've got to bend the knee to try to lower and then use the side bend. So you run out of joints to use.
Yeah.
So the descent needs to come from the arms. That is really where you got to really hammer these arms down away from the player, because there's a lot of power in separating the butt end of the club from the trail shoulder, really getting that arm to get away from you, the both arms, the left arm and the right arm striking. So sequentially, the golf machine would call it power accumulator 4 would go first and power accumulator 1 would go second. The slang of that would be the 4 and the 1. The anatomical terms would be the abduction of the lead arm along with shoulder extension. That would move it down on the plane on an angle, and the trail elbow extending and protracting the trail shoulder. So those, and then of course you would get the adduction of the trail arm. So I'm saying that in anatomical terms because we will have this on YouTube, and you can slow down and read and refer back to. But I also understand the internet, and I don't want to be inaccurate. Thank you for smiling, Anthony. That was my joke. Jeffrey, you have a question. Go ahead.
Hey, Michael, when a player comes to you and they're looking for speed, is that the first place you're going to look if they want to try to build speed and power? Is that separation?
Oh, that's a really good question. No, that's not where yes and no. I'll put it that way. Wasn't planning on talking about this, but I will because I love this topic. But I am flying a little blind here on this. Speed. Everybody likes to talk about speed, and the generation of power is different than the transfer of energy, is how I would answer that. So how does a person generate speed and then transfer that energy into the ball? So to look for power, the first place I would look sequentially would be how many joints can we participate to get the club to move around the arc the furthest? So then you have potential energy. Now, the question is, how are we going to get this energy from potential energy into kinetic energy and transfer it to the ball? So for energy to transfer, the first component has to stop for the energy to transfer the second component. If you remember those desk balls, Newton's silver spheres, that you would kind of release one and the energy would transfer through the other. The energy transfers because the first ball collides, stops, and the energy comes out the other end. So something has to stop for the next segment to go. Good on that? Okay, so here's what that means in golf. So I'm going to pull up one of my long drivers, Wes Patterson. He's kind of a good one to look at for club head speed. So this swing is 134 miles per hour. I don't have his body on it. Regardless, that's not important. If we look at the graph, we have the grip speed graph. So the fastest the butt end of the club, let me pull up the graph here. So from left to right, the graph starts at 0. That's the start of the swing. As he starts to make a backswing, the grip accelerates, speeds up as well, then comes down to the top of the backswing. Basically, at the top of the backswing, the handle is not moving, relatively speaking. There's a moment where it's not moving. So it's at 0 miles per hour. This graph starts to now curve upward to a point right about here. So from left to right, there's a parabolic shape where the handle is now accelerating and speeding up. Everybody good with that? From this point where the purple is, I'll just show you where it is in the swing. Right about here, which would be about P5. You'll notice that the rate of acceleration starts to slow down. So if you're looking at a graph that has an under to an over, like an S shape, the under part is the acceleration. The over part is the application of the negative acceleration. So the handle is actually slowing down, starting at P5. So from the top of the backswing to left arm parallel is the fastest the handle is moving. That's the energy being put into the shaft by the abduction and the extension of the trail elbow. So as you're moving the limbs, you get to this point now where the handle speed starts to slow this rate of acceleration. My 12th grade physics professor said there's no such thing as as deceleration. So I will always call acceleration the positive or negative. So it's on a negative acceleration starting at P5 to the point where it peaks here. The grip speed is at 26 miles per hour. So the grip speed has peaked at 26 miles per hour right at P5.5 about. So the butt end of the club has accelerated from 4 to 5, and then it began its slowing down of the acceleration rate from 5 to 5.5, at which point now the entire grip speed starts to slow down. So the grip is now going into a free fall, basically. It's slowing down, it's braking from 26 miles per hour to about 21 miles per hour at impact. So if I were to say to you that in order to hit hard, you have to stop fast. It goes back to Newton's steel spheres going back and forth. So in order for the club head now to accelerate, you'll notice the club head graph is the opposite. At this point, this thing starts taking off and peaking very fast. So there's no slowing down to the speed of the club head coming down for Wes. What do I see in high handicappers? I see 3 types of graphs here. I'll see either the graph peak and continue to go straight up. That's the over acceleration. I'll see it flatline, or I'll see it dip. And that's an interesting conversation to have. Jeffrey, was that your question? So again, the question was, where would I look to get club head speed? I would look at getting the butt end of the club to move the fastest from 4 to 5, run out a rope at 6 basically, and then the third power familiar can come around the corner. So straightening the arms. Now, if you delayed all of that, where are you going to get the power from? You're not going to get that hand speed. You don't have the time. So having the space to create time by moving all the joints around the arc, number one, to create the potential energy, and then firing the limbs down as fast as you can from 4 to 5, and then stopping the handle so that the club head can go fast. Only one part of the club can go fast at a time. Right now that brings an interesting part. In a putt, would you want significant energy transfer, or would you kind of want the butt end of the club and the putter head to go at the same rate, pretty close to it, right? Or a specialty lob shot where you want to just kind of bump this out of the rough and kind of let it trickle to the hole where you don't want a lot of energy. You might take a longer swing and kind of float this thing around at the same rate. But for a driver, that would be horrible. Yet this is why kind of, those high handicappers kind of can get a nice little bad shot because they don't know how to accelerate the club around the greens. Anthony, you know what I'm talking about. You're smiling and nodding. So being able to have a system, have a model, understand the principles that are in play here. Where do we want to maximize energy transfer? Where do we want to minimize energy transfer? Putting, you wouldn't use as many joints, right? I would use my wrists, my elbows, maybe some shoulders. I'm not going to implore any of my hips, that's for sure. Maybe some of my spine. No knee participation, no ankle participation. So we're negating or annulling power by removing joints and then adding joints in other areas. Was that good? Okay. I'm just looking at the clock. I don't want to run long, but I do have a final piece to talk about, which is our typical over-the-top golfer. Unless there's a question here, another question, we can talk about that. I know we're all fed up of looking at over-the-top golfers, so I don't mind having a different discussion point, but be happy to pull that one up here in a minute. So I'm using Anthony as our first model and his brother Patrick as our second model here. Case study, only because they're my last 2 most recent ones and they're the freshest in my head. One of the things I've found on gears is that I forget what people's golf swings look like because all I see is gold and blue avatars. Sadly. So this is Patrick. Pull my notes. Okay. Patrick's before swing, I'll just play this at full motion for us. And I'll slow it down here a little bit. He's your typical club golfer, I would say. Does a lot of things badly, but he's a sweetheart of a guy, so don't hold that against him. There's a lot of good guys who are bad golfers, unfortunately. So he came to us here. Now, without even looking at the swing, you could see this hand path was moving inward, outward in orange, and then outward again in the follow through. And there was the club head path at the top of the backswing. You can see something's really weird. So the club head is way inside the hands. The face is wide open. Let me get the face angle here. The face is wide open, fanned open. The wrist angles are pretty dorsiflex. That club face is just, you can notice the club face is under the head. That would be the opposite of Dustin Johnson, who would have this club head pointing at the sky. So we got an open face over the topper. He's just going to scissor and peel this thing right across. Does a pretty good job keeping it in it at 6 because the stance is so close. But if we were to go down the line to the stance, that would be the over-the-top move. So he's learned to close his stance to straighten out the swing direction and try to be a functional golfer. But you can see the elbows start folding and rolling the face. And he's such a good guy, but it's just such a disaster. So I really want to help this guy make a better golf swing. So by the time he took it to the backswing from the face on, you can see he only had about 85 degrees of shoulder trim, not very much. So just a show of hands here, how many can commiserate with this guy as far as like, this is your lesson to you? Is this what you guys get? Just quick hand up. Okay, perfect. Steve. Good. I love it. Everybody raise their hands. Okay, good. So we're doing a benefit, a good service here to talk about where to start with Patrick, where to start with this guy. So every GPS that you have in your car, when you get in your car and you decide you're going to go somewhere, it doesn't ask you where you started. It's asks you, where are we ending up? So where's the destination? What's the goal for this golfer? Where are we trying to get to? So if I'm in Akron, Ohio, and I need to get to Philly, I have to go east somewhat, maybe a little bit west. I was on I-80 for about 10 hours the other day. I went west. So I know I need to go east now. So the first thing we did with Patrick was to show him where to end up. So I wanted his arms straight and his hips a little bit more tucked in the follow through. So to get him the understanding that this right arm coming through has to be across the chest. We want to stop this club around the body a little bit more, not so far up. So that was our first starting point. And we kind of had some benefit of the swing path here in the backswing. And I just showed him this with one swing and got his follow through with his arm straight and moving the hands inward. So at P9, right arm parallel, I wanted his right arm across the chest, more degrees. So this right arm from above is across the chest. That was where we started. He did that really good on the first swing. So he knew the right arm had to participate to lower the club and bring it across. That was swing 1. That was swing 6. So swing 7 now, we talk about the right arm and the right shoulder. So what's going to now bring the ascent of the club to the top of the backswing? I told him that. Pause the share for a second, get me back on the screen. So the shoulder complex would have a anatomical neutral, a protraction forward, and a retraction backward. Both shoulders have this capability. So at P1 in address, we start with rounded shoulders or protracted shoulders. At the top of the backswing, this trail shoulder moves the arm around the arc by retracting, and the arm gets abducted to the top. So you can get many more degrees of shoulder turn by moving this trail shoulder in retraction. Let me just pull up protraction, retraction. Here's a great visual. Let's see if I can get that up. Share the screen. So here is the protraction, retraction slide. on the right. So protraction will be the red, retraction will be the blue. Okay, so get back to gears. I take pride in my speed of jumping around, and I'm trying to do my best here for you guys. So in blue, I asked him to retract his trail shoulder to the midline of the body. So as he did that, you'll notice how many more degrees of shoulder turn he got for free. So he was at 85 degrees. Now he's at 103. So that delta is 18 degrees. So I got him 18 more degrees of shoulder turn only with telling him that the trail shoulder had to retract. Now these numbers are inverted, but you can see the location of the, I'll put a dot on the right shoulder location and how far it's gone more forward on the arc. When we overlay these two, you can start seeing how much further that trail shoulder has retracted for free. So we didn't do any fitness. We did not do any flexibility training. We just asked him to participate with that shoulder the best he could to retract that trail shoulder. So as a result, if the trail shoulder is providing the ascent, what's going to happen to the trail elbow? Well, there's quite a different trail elbow motion in blue. You can see there's a lot more external rotation of the trail shoulder with retraction. And now on the downswing, he's not chopping over the top as much. If we remove some of these lines, overlay the two, you can start seeing the hand path, excuse me, the club head path. I'll just do it here without the club head path. A little distracting. As he comes down to P5, as a result, the face is now more, we get a lot of stuff for free with this. So you can see now that the shaft is shallower. It's not as steep. The face is more closed, 5 degrees more closed to the arc. The hands are more in, less over the top. And we all got that from a backswing retraction motion. That was the next piece. So within 2 swings, he was able to get more shoulder turn, which gave him more space with more external rotation, all from understanding how to use this joint to participate. So we're just lining up. Now his head's more forward. The descent is going to be greater. It's going to be more in front of the ball. And he's going to have more shaft lean as a result. That was, they're not all like that, but that would be a starting point. How to get from a player who's, let me put this on the screen. A player who's got internal rotation, lack of shoulder retraction, providing the only way to get ascent would be internal rotation. The top of the backswing, this thing's going to be coming over the top. So by allowing him to retract the shoulder as if he was throwing a ball, retracting the shoulder on an incline, right, would remove the requirement to internally rotate it to get ascent and get some power. So it could be as easy as that sometimes, but this is where the technology of just showing the player with numbers, and I think I've demonstrated today how quickly I can go from screen to screen and add in and point out things, all based on the fact that I have a model. I know in my head what I want this thing to look like. And every single golfer, whether they want to admit it or not, has a model in their head. This is what it looks like. This is what it's supposed to look like. We're not supposed to look like X, Y, or Z. So trying to figure out where's the starting point to get what you see in the golfer in front of you. I don't know who else we teach, but people in front of you, to look like the model or the image that you have in your head of what he should be doing to help them. So I believe everybody, that's why we're professionals, that's why we're good at what we do. We know what it's supposed to look like and we see the difference of where they're at, but how do you start? So by having that model where we would want to have the trail shoulder go up and forward and lead shoulder down and back a little bit in order to create a stable head was the impetus to know that this player wasn't turning his shoulders enough and he was getting this internal rotation. So I just knew that if I had the retraction and the abduction of the trail shoulder, he was going to get this logo to be seen on the front side of the arc more. So I've got a few raised hands here. Brian and S. Riley, I don't know if those were from the previous post, but if there's a question here.
Thank you. I'll jump in. Do you see more success giving the player a cue during setup just to say, hey, at setup, I want the retraction to be more just better posture with your shoulders? Or are you telling them kind of like, hey, I want you to be like a baseball pitcher and really work on getting that trail shoulder back?
The latter. So at address, we would have the protraction of the shoulder. So I wouldn't start with the retracted shoulders and the chest up. I would start with anatomical neutral, explaining what the protraction is, what the word retraction is. And then using an analogy, because I'm a big analogy guy, pick your worst first pitch throw between Obama, Fauci, 50 Cent, and the Chicago mayor, and say, and look at those people, and all they did was keep the protracted shoulder and just throw the forearm at it. They never used the arm. Then point out Tom Brady in the pocket in one of the Super Bowls that we beat you, getting the retraction maximized in order to throw. You like that, Matt? Getting the arm to participate across the chest. And that's a very powerful motion. So there's power in moving the arm across the chest. There's very little power allowing the chest to create that power. So having the player cue in on what is the joint that we're asking to add or subtract more of, and then bring it back to golf and just say, okay, Mrs. Jones, just take this club in your right hand only and retract your shoulder. And what I would tend to do is I would take an alignment rod or a golf club, usually with men, I would just go squat behind them a little bit, or take my fingers and put it right where this logo is in the middle of the scapula, and have them pinch with both shoulders back, just so they can, oh yeah, I can do that. Okay, now we can transfer that concept. So they first have to have an understanding of the task. Dr. Vernon Brooks wrote a great book on motor learning. In it, he says, muscular recruitment comes from the understanding of the task. So if I have two objects here, and Brian, I ask you to pick one up, and you pick up the pencil when I meant for you to pick up the mug, well, you don't need to do finger push-ups to learn how to pick up the mug. You just have to know what the task is better. So by explaining to the person, the task is to use this joint a certain way, the way it's designed to in the normal range of motion. I'm not asking it to go, like Gumby further back, but if they can retract that shoulder more degrees, the most that they can for a driver, right? And maybe a little bit just for a putt, and there's a scale there. I would put my fingers in between and ask them to just pinch, or a golf club, just pinch it. And then dynamic, I did this with Darren Clark yesterday. I squat behind him. I kind of held up the butt end of the club. I tapped his spine right in the middle there of the yoke. And I asked him to bring that shoulder to that back point. Just a practice swing, just move the shoulder to it, and he would feel the time and space of where it is. Okay, now go ahead and hit it. So you take a swing, hit the thing. I'd move the stick out of the way, and you'd hit. So that would be a way that you could induce trail shoulder retraction.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Scott, do you have a question still?
I did. When you have all this data, right, from gears, and then you obviously have that kind of in your mind, and then you see a golf swing out on the driving range and they don't have that data to it, so to speak. How much do you find that you're tending to teach something to do with the body, as opposed to them maybe just doing something with their hands, or grip position or something like that? I hear a lot of your description as like getting the whole body to feel something, or involving more joints. So I just want to kind of hear that relationship of how much you're trying to get them to do something with the body, as opposed to just, hey, I have a 30-minute lesson, I need them to square the club face up,
Yeah. So my lessons are 90 minutes to start. I usually go 2 hours. So it's an education. The student should leave my lesson to be smarter, not dumber. I don't dumb anything down. I'm going to educate them. I firmly believe we as golf instructors are teachers. We're instructors. They should leave smarter, not dumber. By knowing today, I hope everybody understands the participation of this trail shoulder complex. You're smarter for knowing that. I would hope that would be the case. 30-minute lesson. Quick tip on the range. Hey, pro, I'm going out to play. I can't find the ground. So where would you involve the finer motor program versus the larger muscles? Would that be a good summation of your question, Steve? Was it Steve? I see S. Riley.
Yeah, that's Scott. Yes, correct.
Scott, sorry. So if the question is getting, when do you put in the finer motor programs at lower speed? I would do the finer details at lower speed. For the club golfer who doesn't know where to go, I would pose them at P9, right arm parallel, and put him in that and give him some checkpoints. At right arm parallel, your shoulder line, your hip line, your knee line should be pointing at the target. So at least they can kind of know where Main Street is, and then they can find a smoother way to get there. With Darren Clark, we were talking about putting yesterday, and pressure point 1 in the lifeline versus pressure point 3 in the trail index finger. He was having a tendency of losing pressure point 1 in the lifeline and inducing the pressure point in the trigger finger coming up. So that was a little bit more of an adding of loft situation. So I wanted the pressure point to be more pushing down and forward. So could I give that lesson to a high handicap golfer? Yeah. Put your right palm on the shaft, no fingers, and push the left right lifeline to the left thumb, and you'll start stroking the putt without adding loft. You can keep that spin loft under control. That would be a way you could do that. Or in the chipping, you could use that right arm to pump and extend the trail elbow. Full swing stuff. If they could sense their limbs or their fingertips at the end, they wouldn't be a low handicap. They wouldn't be a high handicap to start with. So the big gross motor programs we got to get in first, because like Patrick in my final case study was using his hands the best he could, but it was really sooner on a chart of getting the trail shoulder to retract in order to allow his hands to work. I have a neurosurgeon in Houston, Texas, who told me he has a bad set of hands. I'm like, Doc, you're in people's brains every day, 5 days a week doing surgery. What are you talking about? You got a bad set of hands. I hope you don't have a bad set of hands. You have a nurse who's moving your swivel chair while you're trying to operate. He had his legs going all over the place, doing the hula, and he's got a great set of hands. So I literally put him in a chair and just asked him to move his arms around him instead of getting all this early extension, thrusting of the pelvis, the knees were all over the place. Just lock that down and work on what's the task here. So motor programming is what we do as instructors. Knowing what the task is first cleans the slate, because you're fighting City Hall because these people have preconceived notions of what they think they need to do to hit this ball, whether they admit it or not. You see it. It's there. Good
Do you have
question.
time for one more question before we
I
close?
got all the time in the world. I want to make sure I honor everybody here because I know you guys have things to do.
Sure. Barry, go ahead. Barry, you're on mute.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Go for it, Barry.
Yeah, Mike. I had a couple quick questions. First, I just want to say that I've worked with Andy Plummer and Mike Bennett. I think they're great instructors, and Stack and Tilt. Everything I've learned from it's been extremely helpful. My questions are about how students are taught through Stack and Tilt, and specifically two things. One, I see a lot of students coming from Stack and Tilt setting up excessively left, like practically over the left foot, which is something I guess I don't understand why they do that. And my second question is the statement that a lot of Stack and Tilt instructors use, where they say that grip isn't that important. Those two things kind of baffle me. Just curious what your thoughts are on those.
No problem. I'll go back to our model here on the screen, the template. So in the Stack and Tilt model, the weight forward is only the lower body. It is not the upper center. The reason for the weight forward, as we've drawn it here, is to keep the secondary axis tilt, the blue line of the spine, tilted a little bit to the away from the target in order to induce the secondary axis tilt to get the launch of the ball up. On the downswing, the lower body would continue to slide forward. We only drew this for the backswing, but this will be the follow through. I drew it a little excessively. In order to the hip slide to go forward, in order to create the secondary axis. So is stack and tilt a centered pivot? Yes. Is it a weight forward? Yes, it's both. The lower body is a weight forward. This has been misconstrued as moving the upper body forward as well. And the dilemma for that comes, I think, partly, some of the time, got all my caveats in there, it comes in because we have to reconcile the ball position off of our front shoulder with the driver. So how do we get there? Most golfers have got there by rotating their shoulders. In fact, they feel like they got to move their shoulders forward. So the lower body moves forward, and that's how you get to that front side of the arc, creating a secondary axis tilt to your spine. So the weight forward is not the upper center. The upper center is going to be in between your feet. The lower center, we would say that the left hip has a spectrum of how far forward it should go. I would say the max forward would be the left hip over the left ankle. I wouldn't want it further forward than that, but that would be like 80% of your weight being on the front foot. But you could have it 51% and still have weight forward, a pretty neutral. I think Alex Jacobs is close to 51.49 when we look at his pelvis where it is. I wouldn't want it on the trail foot. However, all the good players who move on the trail foot, like a Rory, starting the trail foot, but very quickly, by the time the club's moved only 10 inches, the pelvis has moved forward. I have that avatar. If we have a minute here, if you guys don't mind, I'm happy to pull it up. So let me pull up Rory here. And for the record, Rory doesn't have to give a single dollar back that he's won, nor any of the hardware. He's doing just fine without his weight being forward at address. So if we visually look at, I'll put if there was a favorite tool, it would be the pelvis sway number that I have on gears. So the pelvis here is 0. It zeroes out at address. However, nobody would argue with me, though the internet has its people. This would be the right hip is closer to the right ankle, whereas the left hip is much further away from the left ankle. Nobody would argue with me that this pelvis is back at P1. It is not forward. We would agree. Everybody would agree with that, I would assume. Every logical person would agree with that. As we move back, as he starts to swing, his point of maximum trail side weight is 1.6 inches. The club's moved, give me a number, 8 inches, 10 inches, less than a foot. It's inside his right foot. At this stage, 1.6 inches away, by the time he moves 1.7 inches away, 1.7 is the maximum. By the time he hits this ball, he's moved 4 inches forward, 4.2. So 1.7 plus 4.2 is 5.9. By the time he finishes his swing, he's gone 9 inches plus the 1.7. So he has a 10.7 inch hip slide. I would never say his weight's back. I would say from the moment the club passes his right foot, that pelvis has continued to craze forward, and more forward. I mean, that's 10.7 inches of hip slide. That would be where I would say the weight is forward. His upper axis, his shoulder sway number, has stayed pretty centered. In fact, you could make a case here at P3 that his upper center is only 1.1 inches back, whereas lower center is 1.7. So he's actually tilted to the left here, I would say. I mean, Aaron Baddeley got called a reverse pivot for less than that. So by the time he moves down, his upper axis is still behind the lower axis. So in that model I showed you at P1, where the pelvis was underneath or stacked underneath the upper hub, by the time he takes it to impact, that lower body is translated forward and upward. He's thrusted 1.6 inches upward. So the misinterpretation of stack and tilt is that it's an upper body forward. It's not. Good. Are we? Any further questions on that first question, Barry?
No, that's what I suspected, because like I said, having worked with Andy Plummer, I never saw him say anything about setting up way left. But like I said, I see a lot of students coming out of stack and tilt setting up virtually over their left foot at address, which to me, it seems to be an over exaggeration and a poor position to start from.
It can be for some, and again, I would not want the upper body forward. The lower body, I would want it as far forward as the left hip over the left ankle as a baseline. Your second question regarding the grip, that it's common phrase that I would say that no stack and tilt instructor who's authorized would say that the grip is unimportant. The word we would use would say that it's a variable. So when you look through a spectrum of grips, if anybody's done a grip study, God knows I've done my fair share of grip studies. I just finished one with Golf Pride. If we look at what is fundamental and what is variable, we would say that if you're teaching a person a grip, which grip would you begin to teach with? So here are two grips that I use quite often as a comparative analysis. I wouldn't teach either of those grips to a player. However, the one on the right won 3 times that year on the PGA Tour, and the one on the left, Bryson DeChambeau, he's won two majors. So this grip would be turned 90 degrees. He'd be fully pronated 90 degrees. And Bryson's vertical. So there's 100 degrees, or if not 90 degrees difference between these two grips. And yet they both can conduct the fundamentals of controlling the low point, hitting it far enough to play the course, and having a predictable curve for a living. They can do all 3 of those tasks. So the golfer on the right would have different variations of that. You wouldn't want the trail hand to roll over at all. You would want to keep that trail hand under as it comes through. Bryson has a very much of a grip roll in the finish, swivel, golf commission will call it, because that's where he's starting. So he's going to have to maintain those relationships with the ball. So the grip is important, but more importantly, how the grip is utilized dynamically is really the key there. But I would never, it's an attachment point. It has there's a lot to talk about on the grip. I could do a 10-hour seminar on the grip. However, it's not a fundamental because there's so many different types of grips. Is there a best grip or a starting grip? Sure. I mean, if nobody's ever held a club before, I'm going to use a very standard grip that Hogan, under the lifeline of the hand, having the right thumb covered, having the lifeline of the right hand cover the left thumb. I think we as golf professionals know what a standard basic of a grip would be. The degree of variation of the attachment is a variation. Where I would say I wouldn't want a split grip, and yet there's Dr. McKenzie talking about a coupled motion where the further the hands are apart, you get more forces in either direction, and all of a sudden you don't see anybody holding it like a hockey stick. But you got Jim Furyk with a double overlap grip. He's got the hands as close as possible. Ricky Fowler's got the hands as close as possible. So there's all sorts of importance on the grip to talk about, but I would say it's not a fundamental. It's not uniformly displayed by the game's best players. It's a variable.
Okay, I mean, I would completely agree with you, and I think the grip depends a lot on the mechanics of the swing of the person involved.
It does, and the shot shape, if I can interrupt, and the shot shape. If I'm hitting a chip shot, my handle might be more forward. I might have a stronger grip. With a driver, I might have the handle back a little bit and put a weaker grip in, so I'd make sure I don't hit it left. So from shot to shot, I would say that the grip varies based on the shaft angle it addresses.
Okay, I guess so. My confusions come in where I've heard stack and tilt instructors say that the grip isn't important and try to change club face angles without addressing the grip. That confused me.
Changing club face angles without changing the grip.
Correct.
That's a new one for me, Barry.
Really?
I haven't heard that one.
Okay.
I would set the face. I think if we all grabbed a club and closed our eyes, we would know when the face was close to the shaft, when the face was open to the shaft, when the face was square to the shaft. You all have that inherent feel as professionals. Even a high handicap, if you ask him to close the face, right, knew what the face was, he could display it just in the air. And then guiding the face at address, where it's pointing, where the three-dimensional face is pointing at address, is a variable as well. So you could dynamically change. Like if the face didn't change in the swing, we wouldn't really have a job. So like I know a lot of players who have the face. Jesper Parnevik has that face pointing, or KJ Choi has that face pointing 30 degrees to the left. G Milka Swing has that face pointing 40 degrees to the right, and they both can play on tour because they manipulate it through the swing. But I would prefer more like an iron byron model where the grip didn't change throughout the swing, or the rotation of the face relationship to the shaft didn't change. That's one of the things we can measure on our gears, how much that face is changing throughout the swing.
Mm.
So again, I'm not saying what I am saying is you could play a lot of different ways. It'd be
Sure.
nice to explain one way to play and then all the variations from that. And that's why I think Stack and Tilt's done a good job of showing a model, a template, and having the variations where you got Charlie Wee, pretty center backswing. You got Troy Madison with all of his weight forward with his lower body at the top of the backswing. And then you know, JJ Henry, who used to shift off the ball 9 inches, 2 inches, and shift the most. So being able to have the flexibility to teach anyone in front of you, and with the widest ability to account for every variation in every joint. That's a large sentence I made there. So that's what I think we're really about.
Another quick question, just because I know
Yeah.
you have gears. Do you think that a grip, particularly like a stronger grip, enables players to have less face rotation, like through impact?
They better. If they
Okay.
want to be good, they better have less face rotation.
Okay. You don't necessarily think that that's helpful.
I've seen it work both ways. You know, you can strengthen the grip and the person can still snap hook it all day
Oh,
long.
sure. Yeah. Obviously, it's relative to every other part of the golf swing, but I'm
Right.
saying in general. It's a
I-
generalization.
In generally speaking, I
Better players.
would prefer something about 45 degrees of turn in the lead pronation of the lead shoulder, lead wrist rather. Lead forearm. I would want 45 degrees.
100% agree.
I wouldn't want it too far in the ends of the spectrum. However, you get good players that show up with that. Man, there was a video on Instagram that blew me away on Mass Golf. On Instagram, Massachusetts Golf Association had a video of a player who had the grip was past 90 degrees and the right hand was under even more, playing in the Mass Amateur in the quarterfinals. And they had him as a, hey, we're off and running in the 101st Mass Open. And it blew me away. It's one of those that you save as an outlier, as far end of the spectrum that, yeah, I wouldn't teach it, but what would I do if I had that guy? That would be the guy who wouldn't tell him to roll his hands at any degrees if you want to be good.
Okay. What would you say that better ball strikers tend to have less face rotation through impact?
I would first define what face rotation would be, and it's not necessarily closure rate, but it's easier to have a larger flat spot, which I don't like that term either. But I know Alex Jacob. I watch him every day, and he has very little face rotation coming through impact. So much so that the ball can be teed up on the edge of a divot, fall into the divot, and he'll still make perfect contact with it. Like, if you weren't seeing it happen, you'd say that's impossible. But the ball can move in his backswing anywhere, and he'll still line it up because of his risk conditions coming through the shot are not chaotic.
Okay.
But it certainly makes it easier to play than, say, a high rate of rotation player like a Jerry Kelly,
Mhm.
which or Jose Maria Olazabal, who have to rely heavily on their short games.
Right.
But again, they don't have to give $1 back, even in the Hall of Fame. I think Jose's in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that was my feeling. I just didn't know if the science from the 3D stuff backed that up or not.
I wouldn't model it that. Like, I would address it if I had the student I had to fix or work with, or we had trouble. I'd address it. However, I wouldn't model it that way. I wouldn't say this is the norm. So my car goes in and they've got to change the spark plugs in it, and the timing belt has to go to a specification that the manufacturer has made. My car takes 5W20 for oil. That's the specification. That's a model that the manufacturer says this is where we're going to go to. Some cars have different specs. I'm never going, well, my car's, let me put the Ferrari oil in it and make my timing belt the Ferrari. It's not made for that. So my modeling would account for where the specs are of what I would want the grip to look like and how I would want the face rotation to be coming through impact. And then I handle the outliers and I push them closer to the model where I would be either increasing or decreasing a variable.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
I think we all do this. We all know what a good golf swing looks like. We're not arguing about that. We're always arguing and bickering about what's the best way to get there, or how would we fix X, Y, or Z. And everybody's correct, and everybody has an entitled to their opinion how they want to get there. But let's talk about modeling one shot, and then we can have a discussion on what would you do differently to get a different result.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you for that question, Barry.
All right, thank you.
Guys, I actually have to hop in the car to go to a meeting. You guys can certainly continue if you'd like, but if we're in a good stopping point, I'd like to thank Michael for spending his morning with us. It was really good information. I think a lot of people got a lot out of it.
Matt, thank you to you, the Philly PGA section, as well as everybody who participated here and everybody who's going to watch this on the replay. Steve Sirac, can't thank him enough for helping me out and getting this up here. David and Brian, thank you for the kind words in the chat there. I appreciate everybody coming in, and happy to help anybody. Matt's got my contact information. I'm at the Navy and on Instagram. You can just go ahead and send me a message, and look forward to helping anybody I can.
Great. Have a good week this week.
Appreciate you guys. Take care.
Bye.
Mike.
Hi, Pete.